Starting at level 1, we have environmental influence. The Mind Flayer can manipulate temperature, air pressure, and storm activity without directly touching its victims, creating environmental changes that signal its presence and weaken potential targets. Throughout Season 2, Will Byers experiences sudden temperature drops whenever the Mind Flayer is near. These aren't minor fluctuations. Joyce notices Will's body temperature dropping several degrees below average when he's under the entity's influence. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's debilitating, making victims sluggish and vulnerable to deeper forms of control. The Mind Flayer itself exists within massive storm systems in the Upside Down, featuring thick black clouds and red lightning that crackle with supernatural energy. These storms aren't natural weather patterns. They're manifestations of the entity's presence, moving with purpose and intelligence across the dimensional landscape. In Season 3, the Mind Flayer's return to Hawkins causes power outages and electrical disruptions across the town. Streetlights flicker and die, radios emit static, and electronic devices malfunction without explanation. When the creature grows stronger, these environmental effects intensify, creating a cascade of technological failures that isolate the town from outside help. These environmental changes serve multiple strategic purposes. Temperature drops weaken victims physically, making them more vulnerable to possession by slowing their reflexes and clouding their judgment. The Mind Flayer prefers cold environments, and this preference transfers to its hosts. Will demands his house to be kept cold during his possession, while Billy Hargrove gets severe burns when exposed to direct sunlight after being flayed. The electrical disruptions demonstrate the Mind Flayer's ability to affect technology and infrastructure, creating chaos that distracts authorities from its true activities. Emergency services become unreliable, communication networks fail, and the normal systems people depend on for safety begin to break down. Environmental influence is the Mind Flayer's weakest form of control, but it establishes presence and creates conditions favorable for stronger possession methods. The temperature manipulation alone can't dominate victims, but it prepares them for what comes next by weakening their physical defenses and creating an atmosphere of dread and unease. Temperature drops and storms might seem minor, but they're just the first warning sign that something far more dangerous is approaching. Moving up to level 2, we encounter sensory awareness. Certain individuals can sense the Mind Flayer's presence and movements without direct possession, creating a psychic awareness that functions like early warning radar for the entity's activities. After escaping the Upside Down in Season 1, Will Byers develops what becomes known as true sight. He experiences regular visions of the Upside Down, seeing the Mind Flayer watching him even though he's in the real world. These visions intensify throughout Season 2, with Will feeling tingles on the back of his neck when the creature is near. The sensory connection manifests as physical sensations that Will can't ignore or suppress. The tingles aren't just uncomfortable, they are urgent warnings that something dangerous is approaching. His body becomes a living detection system, alerting him to threats that others can't perceive. In Season 3, even after being freed from possession, Will retains this connection. He senses when Billy Hargrove and Heather Holloway are flayed, feeling the Mind Flayer's presence through them like a psychic network. Will's neck-tingling reaction in Season 4 implies his connection never fully disappeared, suggesting that once touched by the Mind Flayer, victims are never completely free. This sensory link works both ways. Will can sense the Mind Flayer, but the entity is also aware of Will. The connection functions like a psychic surveillance system, where information flows in both directions. Will knows when the creature is active, what it's planning, and where its influence reaches, but he can't control this awareness or shut it off. The sensations come unbidden, forcing Will to remain constantly alert to threats that others can't see or understand. This creates a psychological burden where he becomes the group's early warning system, responsible for detecting dangers that could destroy everyone he cares about. Sensory awareness provides victims with valuable information about the Mind Flayer's activities, but it also means they can never truly escape its influence. The connection serves as a monitoring system that keeps victims tied to the entity, ensuring that even those who resist direct control remain useful as unwilling spies. The awareness isn't just about sensing presence, it's about understanding intent. Will doesn't just know when the Mind Flayer is near, he can sense what it wants, where it's going, and what it's planning to do next. Advancing to level 3, we reach emotional manipulation and fear amplification. The Mind Flayer can amplify fear, trauma, and negative emotions to weaken targets psychologically before attempting possession, turning victims' own minds against them. When Will confronts the Mind Flayer on the football field in Season 2, Episode 3, the entity uses his fears against him with surgical precision. Bob Newby had advised Will to stand his ground and shouted his nightmares, not knowing the threat was real and far more dangerous than any ordinary bad dream. The Mind Flayer responds by overwhelming Will with terror before infecting him. The entity appears as a massive shadow looming overhead, inducing paralysis through sheer psychological pressure. This isn't just fear, it's existential dread, the kind of terror that makes rational thought impossible and resistance futile. In Season 4, Vecna's methods reveal that this emotional manipulation had been part of the Mind Flayer's strategy all along. Vecna targets victims suffering from trauma, guilt, and depression, using their emotional vulnerabilities as entry points for possession. The entity doesn't just attack randomly, it studies its targets, learning their psychological weaknesses before striking. Victims' trauma makes them more vulnerable to the Mind Flayer's influence because emotional pain creates cracks in their mental defenses. By overwhelming victims emotionally, the entity reduces their ability to resist, making possession easier and more complete. Will's brave attempt to confront his fears on the football field becomes the exact moment the entity chooses to possess him. His courage makes him vulnerable because he lowers his defenses, giving the Mind Flayer the opening it needs to establish control. Billy Hargrove's years of abuse from his father create similar vulnerabilities that the entity recognizes and exploits. The Mind Flayer doesn't need to break Billy's spirit, it's already broken. Instead, it uses his existing rage and pain as fuel for its own purposes, turning his trauma into a weapon against others. Emotional manipulation doesn't directly control victims, but it creates the psychological conditions necessary for possession. By amplifying fear and trauma, the Mind Flayer weakens mental defenses and prepares targets for deeper levels of control. The entity understands that the mind is easier to invade when it's already under assault from within. Fear, guilt, and trauma become doorways that the Mind Flayer can use to enter and establish its presence. Escalating to level 4, we encounter the Psychic Link. The Mind Flayer can see through possessed individuals and monitor events in real time, using hosts as surveillance cameras for gathering intelligence about its enemies and their plans. Throughout Season 2, the Mind Flayer uses Will as an unwilling spy. Everything Will sees, the entity sees. When Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy question Will about the Mind Flayer's weaknesses, the creature forces Will to lie, claiming it doesn't like heat when this information is actually true. The psychic surveillance is so complete that Will becomes a liability to his own rescue efforts. The Mind Flayer manipulates Will into sending soldiers directly into a trap in the tunnels, where Demodogs ambush and kill them. Will's knowledge of the group's plans become a weapon used against them. In Season 3, Billy Hargrove serves the same surveillance function after being flayed. The Mind Flayer monitors Eleven and her friends through Billy's eyes, tracking their movements and learning their strategies. When Will senses Billy's presence at Heather's house, it confirms that the Psychic Link connects all flayed individuals to the hive mind. This surveillance capability makes the Mind Flayer extraordinarily dangerous because it doesn't need to physically follow targets. The entity can observe through possessed hosts scattered throughout Hawkins, gathering information without anyone knowing they're being watched. Billy can interact normally with people while the Mind Flayer observes through him, making the surveillance nearly impossible to detect. The entity learns about human behavior, relationships, and weaknesses by watching through its host's eyes, building a comprehensive understanding of how to manipulate and control people. When the party realizes Will is compromised, they have to carefully control what information they share around him. Every strategy session, every plan they make, the Mind Flayer potentially knows about through its Psychic Link to possessed individuals. The Psychic Link also allows the Mind Flayer to coordinate multiple operations simultaneously. While observing through one host, it can direct attacks through others, creating complex multi-layered strategies that would be impossible without this surveillance network. Telepathic surveillance transforms possessed individuals into unwitting spies, who retain enough autonomy to function normally, while everything they experience feeds directly to the Mind Flayer. This level combines observation with information gathering, making it a critical intelligence tool in the entity's war against humanity. Reaching level 5, we face partial possession. The Mind Flayer can possess someone's mind while leaving their body partially under their own control, creating a split consciousness where victim and entity coexist in the same body. After being infected on the football field, Will experiences partial possession throughout Season 2. He can still function normally most of the time, attending school, talking with friends, and living at home. However, the Mind Flayer can trigger episodes where Will loses time and draws endless sketches of the tunnel system spreading beneath Hawkins. During these episodes, Will experiences now memories, recollections of events he never witnessed but the Mind Flayer did. He remembers things from the entity's perspective, seeing through its consciousness while remaining aware that these aren't his own experiences. Will's body temperature drops several degrees below average during possession. He demands the house be kept cold and refuses to take baths because the entity dislikes heat. These aren't conscious choices. They're compulsions driven by the Mind Flayer's preferences overriding Will's natural human needs. During interrogations, the Mind Flayer forces Will to lie about its weaknesses, speaking through him while Will remains conscious but unable to tell the truth. He knows he's being controlled but can't stop it, creating a horrifying experience of being trapped inside his own body. Partial possession creates a constant internal battle for control. Will fights back mentally, struggling for autonomy, even as the entity puppeteers his actions. He taps out Morse code messages warning others to close the gate, using his left hand because he temporarily regained control of it while the Mind Flayer focused elsewhere. This demonstrates that partial possession isn't complete domination. It's an ongoing struggle where the victim retains some agency and can resist when the entity's attention is divided. The Mind Flayer doesn't need complete control to use Will effectively, as both spy and unwitting saboteur. The horror of partial possession lies in the victim's awareness of what's happening. Will knows he's compromised but can't fully resist, making him a passenger in his own consciousness while the Mind Flayer uses his body and knowledge for its own purposes. Partial possession allows the Mind Flayer to maintain the victim's normal life, while simultaneously serving as a surveillance network and potential weapon. The victim becomes a sleeper agent, appearing normal while secretly serving the entity's interests. Approaching level 6, we encounter full possession. The Mind Flayer completely dominates its victims, eliminating their autonomy almost entirely and transforming humans into obedient servants who can only resist in brief moments of extreme emotional stress. On June 28, 1985, Billy Hargrove crashed his car near Brimborn Steelworks. The Mind Flayer drags him into the basement where a creature made of rat biomass pumps toxic material into his face, fully infecting him. Unlike Will's partial possession, Billy becomes almost completely subservient to the entity's will. Billy kidnaps fellow lifeguard Heather Holloway the next day and brings her to the steelworks for possession. Together, they flay Heather's parents, Tom and Janet Holloway, demonstrating how fully possessed individuals become active recruiters for the Mind Flayer's growing army. Over the following days, Billy and the other flayed recruit dozens more victims, creating a network of possessed humans throughout Hawkins. The flayed develop superhuman strength and endurance. Billy withstands being thrown through concrete walls by 11 and continues fighting as if the injuries were minor inconveniences. They feel reduced pain, with Billy barely reacting when his arm is stabbed during the sauna trap. This isn't just pain tolerance, it's a fundamental alteration in how their nervous systems process damage, making them nearly unstoppable through conventional means. Full possession grants the Mind Flayer near total control over its hosts. Billy retains minimal autonomy, visible only in rare moments of emotional breakthrough. When Karen Wheeler approaches him at the pool, the entity urges him to attack her, but Billy resists and warns her to stay away instead. In the sauna trap, Billy briefly breaks through the Mind Flayer's control, pleading with Max before the entity reasserts dominance. These moments prove some humanity remains buried beneath the possession, but it's so deeply suppressed that it only emerges under extreme emotional stress. The Mind Flayer uses Billy as the prime host, leading the flayed army while maintaining enough independent function to appear normal when necessary. Billy may have remained alive longer because he functions as the primary coordinator, while other flayed are melted into biomass for the entity's physical manifestations. Full possession eliminates resistance except in moments of extreme emotional connection. Victims become extensions of the Mind Flayer's will, retaining just enough humanity to make their loss tragic when brief moments of awareness break through the entity's control. Finally, at level 7, we reach full biological overwrite. The Mind Flayer can completely overwrite human biology, melting bodies into organic material that merges into a collective physical form controlled by the hive mind. In Season 3, the flayed aren't just possessed mentally, they're biologically transformed. Mrs. Doris Driscoll and other flayed consume massive amounts of fertilizer and cleaning chemicals. These chemicals trigger reactions in their bodies that break them down at the cellular level, dissolving the boundaries between individual organisms. The flayed melt into puddles of biomass, their bodies liquefying into organic material that the Mind Flayer absorbs and repurposes. This biomass reforms into flesh creatures, including the spider monster that shares the Mind Flayer's distinctive form and serves as its physical avatar in our dimension. These flesh constructs consist entirely of bone, muscle, and cartilage from melted humans and rats. The creature grows larger as more flayed dissolve and merge into it, eventually forming a massive proxy body that the Mind Flayer controls directly from the upside down. This level represents complete biological assimilation, where victims don't just lose their minds, they lose their physical forms entirely. Their bodies become building material for the Mind Flayer's physical manifestation, with no individual consciousness remaining. The spider monster possesses no individual awareness, only the collective will of the hive mind. When 11 tears off one of its appendages, the creature immediately regrows it by absorbing more biomass, demonstrating that the construct can repair and modify itself using the dissolved remains of its victims. The biological overwrite is irreversible. Once melted, the flayed can't be restored to their original forms. They become permanent components of the hive mind's physical presence, their individual entities erased and replaced by collective consciousness. Even when Joyce and Hopper destroy the gate and sever the connection to the Upside Down, the biomass doesn't reform into individuals. It simply collapses, proving that the transformation destroys the original person completely and permanently. Biological overwrite represents the ultimate expression of the Mind Flayer's control. Victims aren't possessed or controlled. They're consumed and reconstituted as extensions of the entity itself. This level eliminates any possibility of resistance or recovery, making it the most complete and terrifying form of domination in the Mind Flayer's arsenal.